All right, well then I'll go ahead and get going. So today we're gonna talk about Searchlight and also talk a little bit about what we're doing to bring it into Horizon to improve the user experience overall with Horizon. So I'm Travis Tripp. I'm the Searchlight PTL. I'm also a Horizon core, and there's also a user experience team in OpenStack, and I'm a core on that as well. Steve McClellan may be joining us later. He's been a very important person in the whole Searchlight effort, so we'll see if he's able to join. So cloud computing, it's really about relationships, but when we interact with it today, we seem to be focusing often on just kind of a list of things. We have a CLI, which is kind of a predefined list for all of the things. We have a UI, and that's also a predefined list for all the things. But in some ways, a cloud is kind of like a cake. I have a lot of different things that I care about, but I want to put those things together in relationships that I want right now. And so I might have a recipe for a chocolate cake or a vanilla cake or something else. But the important thing is that at different points in time, I want to combine my things to make something interesting. And so managing clouds, in essence, is kind of like managing the relationship between those things. You're often doing things like adding a network to this instance, or maybe you're finding different floating IPs in use by a certain user. And if we look at some of the current interaction paradigms, you'll see that managing these relationships from predefined lists is hard. And so you can come in and maybe you'll jump into your hypervisors, you'll see the list of things, and then you'll see the details of that one thing. Then you want to go and look at, say, instances, you'll see a list of things, and you go back to the details of one of those things. And then you go back to the list of these things, and then you go to the details of one thing. But there's not really a good way to say, I'd like to look across things. And that makes it hard to connect the dots in these predefined lists, especially as we start talking about some of the scale targets of clouds. And ultimately, you find it kind of hard to navigate these relationships in these predefined lists. And so that's why we say cloud requires search. I'd like to build a custom list of related things. And that requires you to be able to search across your cloud. So, I'd like to find all the related but different things. And not only that, I'd like to act on them. Go ahead and view those basic details in line. Drill down for a little bit more. And then dive back further into more related details. But I'd like to always be able to return back to my current search. So Horizon is a GUI, and so therefore everyone has a different opinion about it. And that's okay. We don't all have to agree on the navigation or even the contents of a specific dashboard. But what's more important is if the UI can know which actions are possible for a given resource, which views are available for a given resource, or even how to display a given action for that resource. So in Horizon, we're starting an effort that we're kind of calling Free the Actions and the Views. And so this means we're looking at decoupling some of the actions from their current nested scope within a given panel. So within my instances panel, I may have some actions and they can only live in that instances panel. But we'd like to free that. And so on the Horizon side, we've started what's called the resource type registry. And what that does is it allows us to link each kind of resource with its actions and its views. So say, for example, if you have a registration for, say, glance images, I can register the actions available for it, and I can register the views available for it. And what this does is it makes it cheaper to build a search-oriented view, task-oriented view, basically whatever you want. And it's making Horizon more composable. I'd like to be able to rearrange my resource lists, details, and actions. And so you can ultimately choose your favorite arrangement. You could build a search-based UI or a navigation-based UI. But one critical part about that is unified search. And OpenStack is a set of distributed services. They have distinct responsibilities, different project teams, many layers of code, SQL databases. They're responsible for really operating your cloud. They are what is taking the load when you say you want to launch an instance. But then when you want to actually search, who's there to fulfill that search request so you don't disrupt your operations of the cloud? Well, we really don't all have to implement that, and we also don't have to reinvent it in every single project. And that's where Searchlight came from. Essentially, Searchlight is Elasticsearch that's been injected with OpenStack. We make use of the Elasticsearch Query API, and there's sensible results for simple queries. This also allows for very specific queries. And we add in the role-based access control based on what the data needs and taking advantage of Keystone. And it's very powerful. When you look at it, you have full text search, something that most projects cannot or do not want to provide. There's search term discovery, auto completion, fuzzy search, consistent pagination, and then if you get really fancy, you can do things like geospatial search. But ultimately, we just need to feed it the data. And so when you look at the search, plus the registry we're doing on Horizon, plus the client side, and that means the JavaScript work, we're hoping to have that cake and eat it too. So I have a few more detail slides to go into, but first I'd actually like to show a demo. So hopefully you can see my screen. Maybe I need to increase the size a little bit. But what we have here is the search panel for Horizon. Ultimately, we want to expand this search panel and the services provided behind it to enable there to be search on every single page and even top nav search. But in Mitaka, what we've developed is a panel plugin for Horizon. And one of the first things that you'll notice is that you actually, in this single search result, you have networks, images, DNS records, servers, network ports. So it's really a cross-resource search that you're getting. And if we look at any one of them, you can see that you actually have the details about that particular type of object right here in front of you. So for images, you can see the data about the image. For network, same thing. The basic details are all right there for you. So let's take a look at some of the power of search. The first thing is we can actually just directly limit the type of search we want to do. So if I can click up here, I can say type, image, and you'll see that down here our results have been limited to just images. There's no longer the cross-resource thing happening, but it's within images. Now what we can do is this has dynamically gone back to Searchlight and returned back essentially all the available facets for images that you can query on. So you have all your usual suspects, but in addition, if I were to click on one of these, say disk format, it's also gone back and it's telling you right here, here are the actual disk formats for images that you're able to see.
Hey, Travis, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
You could magnify.
Sure, we can do that. Is that a bit better?
This sounds better. We just running into projector display issue. So if you can go one font bigger, that would be better. But this might
How's
work.
that?
Well,
Does
so
that
that
work for
works.
you?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Okay. Let's see, I could go even slightly bigger. How's that?
Yeah, this is much better.
Okay. So if we come back in here, let's actually refresh. So I don't know if you guys could see this, just to show you again. Here in the network, here in the original search results, we had cross resources, networks, images, DNS records, all of that. And if I click in here and I say type, I can limit it to say just images. And when I do that, Searchlight's immediately queried and returns back the list of facets for that type. So you can see checksum, container format, description, disk format, basically all the things you would expect to see. And if I were to select one of them, say container format, you can see that it's actually returned back and said, here's the actual container formats that are in the index, and here's how many that have that particular type. So if I were to select on bear, you can see it's now limited it down to just those that have the container format of bear. If we were to say select something else, such as disk format, you can see I have, so many that are QCOW2. And we can combine those. And we can also take it back out and change to, say, servers. And when we go to servers, it's also immediately dynamically querying and pulling back the facets that are interesting for servers. And if we select one of them, you'll see, say, for security groups, it's now showing me the facets and the actual options for those security groups, like MySQL. And if we go into one of them, all the data you might expect is in there. So if we clear this off, we can now say, you know what, let's do some custom searching, and I'd like to search across things. So if I were to search on web, you'll see here that I've actually got a set of results. I've got a network, I've got images, and I got servers. And this network, if we scroll down, has been tagged with web. So that's a new thing in Neutron, in Mitaka, that you can put tags on it. So now we're able to essentially dynamically group our results very easily. We could say, you know what, I want Apache on there. And you can see that the search results change. And that's because Searchlight's actually applying scoring and returning back things in the order in which they seem to be the most relevant. So if I do web Apache, you'll get a slightly different score because maybe it hits on image faster than network. And we could keep on expanding Python. And the thing that you can't see, since I made the window so small, is that we've actually now got 40 results as opposed to previously we only had 9. And so now we can start saying, okay, I actually want to make this more specific. And you can do Boolean type queries and grouping and all kinds of fun stuff. So I want web or something that has Apache and Python. And this will give us back our search results. And you see we're down to our 10 items. And so you can get extremely detailed or group things exactly how you want them. You're no longer bound to how somebody decided the UI should look or how the navigation structure should be. Now, if we come into these, you'll see the other thing here is we have actions. So in Mitaka, we were able to create a new client-side UI for images. In some deployments, they may choose to enable or disable it, but when it's enabled, the actions are now visible in the search results. So here for an image, we can actually click to launch that image, and it will bring up the launch instance wizard with the image already selected. We also have the other actions available for it. So create volumes, update metadata, and delete image. And so this means that you can either go to your images page, or you can do search and actually take action directly from within your search results. So this actually isn't limited to just the UI. So give me 1 second and I'll switch some of the screen share here. And I want to show, let me zoom this in for you as well. Let's see. So I hope you can see this, but out on the CLI, we've got integration to the OpenStack client. So if we go ahead and say OpenStack, start our session, you can say search facet list. Let me exit that. We'll just jump in and we'll say OpenStack. We do a facet list, you actually see I've got my facets for everything. I can make my window a little bit smaller here now that I've zoomed in. So I can also say search facet list for a particular type. And there's your facets and your possibilities for glance images. We can also do queries. Search query, we'll do that web query again. And there you see we've actually got our results specifically there. And of course, we can keep on building that query out as well. And you can see how it keeps limiting it. Now, one of the more interesting parts is we're actually also able to, with Searchlight, say, I only care about certain columns. And say I care about seeing these things. So in our results, you can actually see I've got these that have a status of active. I see their name. And we can turn that into and say, I really want to see the JSON representation of that. And so you can see right there, we're able to get the JSON representation. And we could also say, I want to see the full source. Just take off the specific columns we care about. And now we've got the full source in the search results. So let me switch back to the presentation. Let's see. All right. So Nikhil, I hope you can see the presentation again.
Yes, you can. Thank you.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the concept flow, what you just saw. Horizon and your other CLI clients, they can do list and query requests against Searchlight, but they still should always be doing their action requests and probably getting for a single item, if they know that item, directly against the service API. These cloud services, Nova, Glance, Neutron, Cinder, Designate, in Searchlight, we essentially have some plugins for each different service. And what that enables us to do is we can index a given service on demand, and that's where we just tell Searchlight, hey, go and sync up Glance images. And it'll go out there and grab all the images, it loads them in, gets all the data. But for keeping it up to date, we're really looking to use notifications. So using Oslo messaging, we can consume the notifications from the different services and load that data in. We're also exploring with the Swift team the ability to do direct injection, and that's where they're going to potentially look at some layer of their code where they can just directly push the data into Searchlight/Elasticsearch. And so you use it when it's there. It's in the Keystone catalog. It's under the type search. And if it's available, you can use the search service and get your result objects. If it's not available, just use your standard APIs so you can gracefully degrade it. Right now, we have it as a per region endpoint deployment, but we're going to be looking in the next release about what can we do about better enabling cross-region deployment so you can search across your regions. For your deployment components, typically what you would see is we have the Searchlight API service. You could put a load balancer in front of that, and your clients can do their searching. And the Searchlight API service essentially grabs those requests, does mappings, it does some RBAC things, and then hits the Elasticsearch cluster. For the cloud services, they go via Oslo messaging or via direct injection to the Searchlight listener service. That thing takes the data, and it will then sometimes enrich it because the notifications may not contain all the data that it needs, so it may have to do a callback, and then it sends the data on into the Elasticsearch cluster. With the queries, you can actually get really specific. I hope this isn't too hard to read there in the room, but I was showing the simple kind of I just type and have a few ands or ors. But since we're leveraging the Elasticsearch syntax, you can actually do really specific things. You can have a query, for example, that says, I must match certain things. I must have a certain range of, say, greater than or equal to a certain date or between a certain date range. I also should match on some other things. And then you can say minimum should match. So you could say, I have 3 things that must match. Here's 3 other things that should match. And only return a result if at least, say, 2 of those shoulds actually do match. And so you can get really creative with your queries and get very interesting. And Searchlight will take your queries. It actually then appends in some RBAC, some role-based access controls specific to that type of resource. This is all through the plugin mechanism, and ensures that the query going into Elasticsearch will limit out, for example, projects that you're not a part of or that you're logged into. And then we also have post-query RBAC filtering. So if there's certain fields that might actually come out that we know should not be returned because of a certain regex pattern or something, we can apply additional filtering after the query comes back from Elasticsearch. So as is Mitaka, we have a Horizon plugin. Right now it's being developed on top of Tree Horizon, but at the Horizon mid-cycle, we made the decision that to get a release of it for Mitaka, we're going to go ahead and put a repo out there, and we're going to put the search plugin out in that repo and tag it. That'll happen in the next week or two. Continue developing on it, potentially in Tree, potentially out on the plugin repo, but everybody on the Horizon core team essentially agrees that search is a core feature that we need to get into Horizon, and so at some point this plugin may move back into Horizon Master, and then we can better integrate it into all of the panels and across Horizon. There's OpenStack Client plugin for it, as you saw. And then as far as content, we have Nova instances. We have glance images, snapshots, metadefs, Cinder volumes, and snapshots. That's still a patch that's it's in feature freeze exception, but it's pretty much just going through final testing. Neutron networks and ports, subnet routers. We're also working on Swift. So we've been talking to the Swift team quite a bit. In this release, we'll have a sample middleware plugin for Swift for notifications, but it's not officially supported by Swift. And we're going to continue to work with them on how to achieve the scalability that they think is needed for injecting their data. Then we also have designate DNS zones and record sets. So one of the biggest things we need for this to scale is we need to improve the notifications. So a lot of the services have been a little spotty with their handling of notifications. At times, they've kind of forgotten about notifications when they've made changes to their APIs. They haven't remembered to say, oh, let's add the event, or let's make sure this data goes out in the notification. And so that's one of our big things that we'd like to see in Newton across the board, is better notifications with all the events that are really appropriate, as well as getting all of the data into those notifications, so that when we receive that notification, we don't have to do an API callback to get the full set of data. And search needs client-side in Horizon because search is interactive. So there's been a lot of work on called angularizing Horizon, and this is really just taking better advantage of browser-side JavaScript technology to render your pages, rather than the typical Horizon pattern of you make a change on your data and it goes to the server, and then the server responds with a full set of data. And so we've been working on the angularization effort for a while, and we're going to continue that effort. So ultimately, we'd love for new contributors to join us. We are Searchlight on the OpenStack Dev mailing list. We're in Freenode IRC, OpenStack Searchlight, and we do have a weekly meeting. So that's it. That's pretty much the overview on Searchlight. So do we have any questions with that?
Thank you, Travis.
Do you see this as more like for admins of clouds, like watch monitor the cloud, or is it going to be tenants?
Nikhil, can you repeat some of that? I really couldn't hear.
So the question is this functionality available to admins of the cloud, or is it available to tenants and the subtenants?
It is intended to be used for admins, tenants, and subtenants. So when we have the plugin for Searchlight, that plugin essentially knows both the data that's being loaded in, as well as the security that needs to be applied to that data. And the plugin's responsibility is to also, when a request comes in, we see what type has been requested. So for example, if it's images, and that plugin is given an opportunity both before we send the search through and afterwards to apply the correct access controls on it. So for example, with Glance, if a request comes in for Glance, the request coming in, we'll actually look at it and it will add essentially a filter for that particular project ID. We also have built into it the ability to see if this, to return results, so that if this image has been shared with that project, they'll get that image in the results, or if the image is public, they'll also get those results. And Glance even has a fun little extra tidbit to it, where if you have certain properties that you want to have filtered on their way back out, based off of some regular expression, we also support that. So these plugins essentially add in the ability to do the correct filtering based off of what you're doing or what your role is. Now, if you come in as an admin and you specify the all projects flag, we look at that keystone token, we verify that you're actually an admin and that you actually can see all projects, for example, and we'll return you back more data rather than just the limited data.
This is an attempt, because typically when people build OpenStack, they build an OpenStack set independently for the monitor. This is an attempt to bring that in-house.
Okay, so the question is this being used to, or can this be used, or is this being used to monitor the OpenStack deployments, or what else, besides the regular user interface, would this feature have used for?
It's not, the word monitor kind of has a lot of connotations to it. This is intended for your cloud resources that are actually in your cloud that your users are instantiating and interacting with. For monitoring, there's other solutions such as Mitaka And those are more in tune with, say, looking at all the events happening and dealing with the operational runtime aspects of your cloud.
Into or
So Searchlight is more about cloud resources and integrating them together. And then the Horizon aspect is the overlay, which basically gives a good user interface. We have one more question, Travis.
Sure.
Since this is in Elasticsearch, you continue the old indexes of everything for the cloud resources, the local Horizon and CLI, and merge it with log data that I can keep in the cloud stack, so I can correlate those two and look at events that come from the log, and have very specific IDs or let's say image and see whether they're related to
So the question is, can you combine, raw data that you may have for events or any other cloud notifications, and then use these with the Searchlight plugins of different projects?
I may not totally follow the question, but you can definitely combine the data as you see fit. So Searchlight is built off of essentially a stevedore plugin mechanism. And if you wanted to create your own custom plugin for Searchlight to receive events and combine them in whatever way you want, you could do that. So you could add your own plugin, and they're actually very small. The plugins in general, we're generally seeing them only be a couple hundred lines of code, and then like 1,000 lines of test code. But the actual plugin itself is very simple. It is very interesting. One of the things that we have debated quite a bit on the Searchlight team is how much do we normalize or denormalize the data? And so far we've been sticking with keeping the data kind of pure. So if you have separate data structures, so for example, networks, they can have network ports. Elasticsearch supports something called parent-child relationships. And so we've been keeping the data kind of more separated. And that's more for essentially speed or ease of indexing, so that if we get an event in for, say, a change network port, we actually only have to change that one document in the index. Whereas if you didn't do it that way, if you got a port in, we'd actually have to go and update the entire document. Or maybe a better example would actually be flavors and servers, or an instance. So an instance has a reference to a flavor ID. And we could very easily combine all that data into a single document request or document that's indexed. So you could say, here's an instance, and in that instance, I have thrown in all the details about a flavor, I've thrown in all the details about the image, and I've thrown all the details in about the networks. And so on that single document, you'll have everything. But what that leads to is every time an instance, every time a flavor changes, we'd have to re-index every instance that's using it. So right now we've been still keeping kind of the relationship via ID and not really combining resources into a single index. But what you can do is you can create queries that join all these documents together at query time. So that's, I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but essentially there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. Right now we're staying a little bit more pure to the OpenStack data model, but we certainly could change plugins, or a deployer or somebody could write their own plugin that actually does combine everything into a single document. Because oftentimes with a search index, you want to potentially structure data to meet the queries that you know you're going to be performing the most often. Okay, so is that it, Nikhil?
Yeah, I think that's it. Um, yeah, that was a great presentation. I think we learned a lot.
Okay, great. Well, I
Like,
definitely would encourage people to contribute or to even try it out and give us feedback. As you know, through Newton, we'll be looking to incorporate any of that feedback, and now's a great time to take that. I guess I should say, out on launchpad.net, there are listings of blueprints and bugs. For some reason, it doesn't look like Launchpad's responding for me right now. But there are a list of blueprints and bugs, and if there's anything that's of interest to you, you can definitely look at jumping in on it. And also, if there's any Horizon developers in the room, I definitely say, as we look towards angularizing the panels, pay particular attention to building your actions so that they're not directly tied to, say, a specific page. Because if you are able to build your actions so that we can reuse them in different views and make it more composable, it'll definitely make it more search compatible as well.
thank you, Travis.
All right, well, thank you very much.